The air hung thick over the Nevada desert, shimmering with heat waves that dance above the dry, cracked earth. At 3:42 a.m., the silence was broken by a thunderous concussion that lit up the sky like an artificial dawn. For a brief moment, it seemed the stars themselves blinked out, as if something massive had passed between them and the earth. By the time the shockwave reached the ground, the object had already buried itself 12 feet deep in a canyon west of Tonopah. Dr. Alara Miles wasn't supposed to be in the country. Her sabbatical in Iceland had been unexpectedly cut short by a phone call with no caller ID and only 5 words. "We need you. It's here." A world-class physicist known for her theories on non-local energy fields, Alara had often speculated, off the record, about propulsion systems that defied conventional space-time mechanics. When the call came, she knew it wasn't a hoax. Something had arrived. She landed at Nellis Air Force Base on a covered night, greeted not by the military brass she expected, but by a man in civilian clothes. Compact build, dark suit, and colder eyes in the desert night. "Dr. Miles," he said, extending a hand she didn't take. "Agent Keene, follow me." They said little during the drive. Keene didn't answer her questions, and Alara didn't like repeating herself. When they pulled up the perimeter of the dig site, floodlights had turned the remote canyon into a surgical theater. Teams in white suits moved like silent phantoms around a dome of reinforced glass, beneath which something vast and alien shimmered with light that didn't reflect off surfaces but seemed to move through them. Alara stepped closer. Her breath caught. It wasn't just metal. It moved. Even lying inert, the object pulsed subtly, like the skin of a sleeping creature. Perfectly smooth, matte black, no rivets, no seams. As she walked its circumference, the material refracted the air around it in a way her brain struggled to accept. "No entry point?" she asked. "None we can find," said Keene, his voice low. "Our best guess is it's about 20 meters long, ovular, maybe a ship's core. Or a weapon." Alara squinted at it. "It's not a weapon," she said without thinking. "It's breathing." The next morning, they brought in specialists, material scientists, linguists, theoretical engineers. Every test, every scan returned the same anomaly. The engine, or whatever it was, defied categorization. Gamma bursts and randomized pulses, gravity wells that bent instruments, radiation signatures unknown to the periodic table. It was like the laws of physics hesitated around it. Then there was a sound, barely perceptible at first, a harmonic oscillation too low for human ears. Dogs in the nearby town refused to eat. Clocks spun backward in short bursts. A man in logistics had a nosebleed that wouldn't clot. When Alara stood near for long enough, she felt something else. Images that weren't hers. A memory of standing under 3 suns. The smell of metal and ozone and something older than Earth. They didn't tell the public. A cover story went out, meteor impact. Small seismic event. Minor gas leak. Anything but the truth. But word spread fast among those who paid attention to the margins of scientific discourse. Someone leaked a blurry photo to a conspiracy forum. The post was taken down in 12 minutes. The user account disappeared forever. That night, the object opened. Not all the way. Just enough. A single slit appeared, horizontally, perfectly centered. Inside, a brief pulse of light, sharp enough to leave retinal scars on 3 nearby researchers. Cameras caught only static, but for the first time, it revealed its texture. Not metal, not ceramic, but something fibrous, interlaced, almost organic. The gap sealed itself 5 minutes later. No external trigger. No sound. The team scrambled. Scanning equipment was reconfigured. Tensions erupted. One engineer accused another of sabotage. A linguist quit without warning, claiming dreams she couldn't explain. Alara tried to remain detached, analytical, but the object was affecting them. All of them, and not just psychologically. "Are you telling me it's reacting to our thoughts?" Keene asked her 2 nights later, when the object briefly emitted a light pattern that mirrored the brain scan of a researcher who had just fallen asleep near it. "I'm saying it's aware," she said, "and it's listening." He stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "You've thought about this before." "Not like this," she replied. "But I've hoped." 3 days in, a classified committee convened. The question was simple: open it by force or wait for another sign. Half the room voted for cutting it open with lasers. The other half feared that any intrusion might activate an unknown defense system. Ilara was the tie-breaking vote. "We don't understand it," she said. "And that's the point. It isn't a threat until we decide to make it one." The following morning, she returned to the containment dome alone. As she stepped forward, the object opened again, but this time it welcomed her. A staircase unfolded, not mechanical, but like it grew from the surface, rearranging its texture into steps that shimmered under her weight. The inside glowed with no obvious light source. Colors she couldn't name pulsed gently along the walls. Her breath fogged, though the air was warm. A low hum resonated in her chest, like a lullaby half forgotten. And then she saw it. A sphere, suspended in the center of the chamber, rotating slowly, embedded with fractal shapes that defied Euclidean geometry. It was beautiful and terrifying, not because it looked dangerous, but because it looked unfinished, as if waiting for something, or someone. Ilara reached toward it. Her hand hovered just above the surface. Behind her, Keen's voice rang out, sharp, urgent. "Step away from it, Doctor." She couldn't. The sphere pulsed, and then everything went dark. When she came to, she was outside again, surrounded by a dozen armed guards. Keen knelt beside her, expression unreadable. A fresh wound curved along her temple. "What did you see in there?" he asked. She looked up at him, blinking into the sunrise. Her voice was dry but steady. "It's not from here," she whispered, "and it's not alone." Keen stood slowly, exhaling a breath that seemed to carry more weight than the moment allowed. "Then we're already behind," he said. In the distance, behind the ridge, the sky shimmered once more. A brief flicker, like a mirror catching the sun. They were no longer wondering if something had arrived. They had asked, "How many more are still on the way?" Ilara stood at the edge of the entry point, where the alien structure had opened for her days ago, an act that had not repeated since. The surface was once again sealed, seamless as ever, giving no clue that it had ever moved. But something inside her had changed. The sphere had imprinted itself on her memory with such vivid precision that she could still see it when she closed her eyes, a floating core of layered geometries, each rotating independently yet harmoniously, humming with a presence that felt sentient. She hadn't told Keen everything. She couldn't, the moment she touched the sphere, or nearly did. Images had flashed through her mind. Stars falling in reverse, machines blooming like flowers, beings of shadow and light arching across impossible skies. She had no language for what she saw. But the message was clear. The object wasn't simply a device. It was part of something larger, something networked across time and space. Now the engine, if that was even the right word, had gone dormant, or watching, waiting. The research facility around it had expanded. A second dome had been erected, this one a command center filled with rows of holographic monitors, AI translation engines, and an ever-growing team of specialists. Keen had pulled resources from private contractors, international labs, even 2 tech billionaires whose names were kept off all official paperwork. Everyone wanted a piece of the artifact. No one could make it speak again, except perhaps Ilara. "You've been quiet," Keen said one evening, handing her a mug of synthetic coffee. "Thinking." "Dreaming," she said, not meeting his eyes. "It keeps pulling me in, even when I sleep." He frowned, leaning against the wall. "We ran deep scans. No radiation, no implants. Nothing in your neural scans indicates interference." "That's the thing," she murmured. "Whatever it is, it doesn't need to leave a mark." Keen studied her for a moment. She didn't know whether he trusted her more or less now. He seemed caught between admiration and suspicion, as though trying to calculate how much of what she experienced was useful and how much was dangerous. The following day, they got their first breakthrough. Dr. Anton Velasquez, a quantum materials expert, reported that a section of the exterior surface responded to acoustic vibration. Not just reacted, changed. A recorded sequence of specific low-frequency tones caused microscopic ridges to emerge from the smooth shell, forming a pattern that resembled both a waveform and a glyph. "It's a language," Velasquez declared. "Not vocal, not symbolic. It's responsive geometry. It speaks in forms." Keene ordered a full lockdown of the facility. No signals in or out. The glyphs, if that's what they were, could be anything: instructions, a warning, a map. They began feeding it harmonic sequences, adjusting tone, pitch, modulation. Some combinations elicited no response. Others made the entire structure tremble faintly, like the hull of a ship in a storm. Ilera observed it all with a strange detachment. The team was doing everything right by human standards, treating the object as a problem to solve, a puzzle to unlock. But she had begun to suspect that logic and methodology were the wrong tools. The engine didn't behave like a machine. It behaved like a mirror, one that reflected not just actions, but intentions. Late that night, when the rest of the base had gone quiet, she returned to the chamber. The guards let her through with a nod. Keene had authorized her unrestricted access. Inside, the lights were dimmed, the atmosphere pressurized to the softest, almost like a breath. The surface glimmered faintly beneath her feet. She approached the core, now dormant, the sphere no longer suspended but gently resting in a cradle that hadn't been there before. "Ilera!" She turned. Keene stood in the doorway, one hand on the threshold, as if he were wary of stepping inside. "It's not dangerous," she said. "That's not why I'm hesitant," he replied. "It's watching us." She tilted her head. "Or listening." He stepped inside slowly, eyes scanning the walls. "We need results. Do you think you can make it respond again?" "I don't think that's the right question." She stepped closer to the sphere. "The better question is, why did it open for me the first time?" Keene folded his arms. "You touched it." "No," she said. "I almost touched it." The two stood there in silence. Then something shifted. The sphere lifted itself again, rising without noise or visible propulsion. Light blossomed along its surface, lines of motion tracing the contours of impossible patterns, as if the object had been carved from the memory of movement. The hum returned, deeper now, richer. It wasn't random. It was tonal, a chord, stretched across frequencies not meant for human ears. Ilera could feel it in her bones. Keene instinctively reached for his sidearm, but stopped halfway. He exhaled slowly. "What's it doing?" "It's responding," Ilera said. Her voice was soft, almost reverent. The sphere pulsed again, and the chamber changed. Not visibly, but in sensation. The air grew heavier, charged. And then the symbols reappeared, not on the walls, but in the air itself. Holographic projections formed around the core, not in any language they recognized, but rhythmic, fractal shapes that repeated and morphed in sync with the sphere's pulses. Ilera took a step forward. The projections hovered, paused, then rearranged themselves, this time forming a spiral. She raised her hand, mimicking the shape. The moment her fingers completed the motion, the spiral expanded, wrapping around her in a slow, gentle orbit. Inside it, time seemed to dilate. Her heartbeat slowed. The room quieted, as though the air itself was listening. "Ilera," Keene said, tense now. "We need to slow down." But she didn't hear him. Her mind filled again, not with visions this time, but concepts. Gravity as a loop, energy as intention, propulsion not as force, but as negotiation with space itself. She felt as though the universe had turned inside out, revealing a new skeleton beneath its skin. And then the images shifted. Planets burned in silence. Structures collapsed into starlight. A vessel, an object like the engine, falling through space, trailing fire, breaking apart. An accident, or perhaps an escape. When the projections faded, Ilera collapsed to her knees, shaking. Keene rushed to her side. "Talk to me. What did it show you?" She looked up at him, her eyes rimmed with tears. "It's a memory. This engine, it was part of something larger. A ship, I think. It fell. Or it was sent. But it wasn't alone." Keene helped her to her feet. "Are there more of these?" She nodded slowly. "Not here. Not yet. But it was running. Fleeing. From something." As he led her out of the chamber, the sphere returned to its dormant state. The lights dimmed. The hum ceased. Whatever it had revealed, it had done so deliberately, and perhaps reluctantly. Back in the command center, the team was already reviewing sensor data, radiation spikes, time dilation events, energy readings that flirted with the infinite. Velasquez was giddy. Others were terrified. Keen leaned over Lara's desk, his voice low. "We need to be ready for what comes next." She looked at the monitor, where the spiral still rotated gently, burned into the display like an afterimage. "We're not ready," she said. "But it doesn't matter." Outside, far in the desert night, a small tremor rippled across the ground, too subtle to trigger alarms, just enough to crack the soil. Something had stirred. The following morning began with silence, the kind that suggested absence rather than calm. The hum within the artifact had ceased entirely, not just muffled but erased, as if it had withdrawn itself from the plane of sound. Ilara felt its absence like a missing limb. Where once the chamber had felt aware, now it was still, inert, watching through closed eyes. "Is it dead?" asked Velasquez, peering into the containment dome. "No," Ilara replied, eyes narrowed. "It's waiting." Keen had changed. In the days since the sphere had revealed its memory, his guarded demeanor had grown sharper, more clipped. He moved through a facility with military precision, speaking in short bursts and watching Ilara like she might become a liability. But something in his eyes betrayed the truth. Fear, not of her, but of what she might yet uncover. They replayed the recordings again and again. The spiral, the burning ship, the network of engines scattered like seeds across a map of stars. Ilara had traced the patterns by hand, cross-referenced their spatial relationships against known stellar charts. She found no perfect match, until she tilted the configuration, inverted it, and overlaid a projection of the local star cluster 3,000 years ago. 5 of the patterns aligned perfectly. One of them was Earth. "They were here before," she whispered, staring at the overlay. Velasquez frowned. "Or they always have been." When she presented her findings to the team, a palpable tension filled the room. Half believed it. The other half didn't want to. A buried engine with memory and sentience was one thing. The idea of multiple such artifacts, possibly monitoring or connected across centuries, felt like crossing a line between revelation and dread. Keen called for a closed-door meeting. Ilara, Velasquez, and 2 others were summoned. A digital display lit the room with pale blue light. "New data," Keen said. "Seismic anomalies, 200 miles north. Remote, uninhabited sector near Mount Tobin. Geological teams picked up underground reverberations at matched frequency signatures to the object here." Ilara's heart rate spiked. "Another engine?" He nodded. "Possibly, but this one is still buried. The readings are irregular, almost like it's sending out a distress pulse." She leaned forward. "Then we need to go. Immediately." Velasquez looked between them. "We haven't even finished decoding the one we have. Which is why we need context," Ilara said, already calculating logistics in her mind. "If this isn't an isolated incident, we're looking at a distributed network. Maybe a beacon system. Maybe a failsafe." Keen's voice dropped. "Or a trap." The next 48 hours moved in a blur. A transport convoy left the Tonopah site under heavy escort, moving under the cover of a solar flare that disrupted civilian satellite surveillance. Ilara rode in the lead vehicle with Keen, silence stretching between them like taut wire. "You're not telling me everything," she said, watching the desert blur past. "You're right," he replied, not looking at her. "There's something classified above me." DI intercepted a transmission from deep orbit. It came 3 hours after your encounter with the sphere. She turned sharply. "Transmission? From where?" "Somewhere beyond Pluto. Not from a probe. No known trajectory. But it used a harmonic pattern identical to what you triggered." She stared at him, stunned. "So it replied?" He nodded. "Or reported." They reached the second site, under moonlight. The landscape was raw, jagged terrain. No roads, no settlements, just rock and silence. Drones had already begun excavating a sinkhole. What they uncovered wasn't identical to the first engine. It was smaller, irregular, with fracture lines along its surface. But the material was the same, matte black, unnaturally smooth, and subtly shifting even in its damaged state. Illyra felt it before she saw it. An ache in the base of her skull, like pressure building behind her eyes. The moment she approached the edge of the dig, her pulse spiked. The sphere inside the chamber back at Tonopah had been silent for hours. Now, she felt again, as if it were aware of the other's presence. "It's trying to reconnect," she whispered. "They're part of the same consciousness." Keen looked down into the crater. And if this one is dying, then the others might already be gone. They set up a temporary lab on site. No containment dome this time, just sensors, data streams, and a single access point drilled into the fracture hull. Illyra insisted on entering alone. The chamber was dark, but not lifeless. A dull red glow pulsed like an injured heart. Unlike the first, this engine didn't float or hum. It wheezed. She stepped closer. The room warped gently around her movements. Not visually, emotionally. A sorrow settled in the air, oppressive, intimate. Then it spoke. Not in sound, not in vision, but in feeling. Regret. Isolation. A memory fragmented. An engine falling out of sync with its siblings. Screaming through atmosphere. Failing to land intact. A sentient device designed to endure. Now dying far from its origin. Illyra knelt beside it, her hand hovering near a split in the surface. It bled light, flickering like a dying star. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know how to help." But something changed. The light stabilized. A final pulse flickered into the air. A map. This time clearer. 7 locations. For already faded. One marked in urgent red. Another deep beneath the Pacific. The final moving. She ran outside, shouting for Keen. When she showed him projection, he didn't speak. He just pointed. "That last one, it's airborne." "A ship?" the last guest asked. Keen shook his head. "No, something else." Then the feed cut. All telemetry from Tonopah went dead. No signal. No response. Just static. Illyra felt her breath catch. The sphere. Keen was already barking orders. "Mobilize the team. Get eyes on the base. I want drones in the air in 2 minutes." But it was too late. The screen lit up again, this time on its own. A live feed flickered into existence. The Tonopah facility, viewed from above. The containment dome was intact. But standing above it, hovering 20 feet in the air, was a second sphere, larger, darker, its surface rippling like fluid metal. It pulsed once, and the feed went black. Illyra stared at the empty screen, her hands trembling. "It wasn't reporting distress," she said slowly. Keen turned to her. What was it doing? She looked up at him, her voice barely audible. It was summoning reinforcements. The command center in the desert no longer responded to any frequency known to Earth. The Tonopah base had become a black hole of information, dead quiet. No movement on satellite feeds, no heat signatures. The moment the second sphere appeared, every piece of Earth technology in a 100-mile radius ceased to function. It was as if the artifact had blinked the surrounding fabric of reality offline. Illyra stood before the dying engine in the crater. Its light dimmed now, the map projection slowly disintegrating into static trails of energy. She knew what it meant. The first engine had been a signal fire. The second one, a sentinel, a relay. It had fulfilled its purpose, not as a tool for human exploration, but as a flare in the dark, a call answered. Keen paced behind her, his voice hard. What if they're not coming to help us? What if this is an invasion? She turned slowly, then went out to target. His brows furrowed. You think it's something else? I think, she hesitated, then walked to the edge of the crater and pointed at the fractured shell. This wasn't meant for us. None of it is. We're just standing too close to something ancient that's waking up. The last guest joined them, panting from his run back from the mobile array. Telemetry just came back online. But it's different, encrypted in patterns we've never seen. The second sphere is broadcasting. High-frequency bursts in layered modulation. I think it's trying to talk. To whom? Keen asked. Not us, the last guest said quietly. To the sky. The cratered engine pulsed one last time before it finally darkened for good, its inner core folding on itself, becoming inert. Alara felt the absence like a door slamming shut inside her mind. Whatever thread had connected her to it was now severed. They returned to the mobile command vehicle. Keene was already coordinating with the Pentagon, feeding the fragmented data up the chain. Defense satellites were repositioned, submarines rerouted, yet no human system could anticipate what would happen next. At 3:14 Greenwich Mean Time, across 3 different continents, magnetic anomalies caused entire grids to fail. In the skies of the Pacific, a ripple, barely perceptible, moved fast in the wind, bending clouds as it passed. The news didn't reach the public. It was quarantined, contained in bureaucratic mazes labeled experimental weapons test or solar interference. But Alara knew. She had felt it before the reports even arrived. The second sphere was no longer alone. She watched the skies, unable to sleep, Velasquez beside her with a tablet of jittering graphs. "You look like hell," he murmured. "So do you," she replied. Keene's planning a tactical incursion into the Tonopah site. Full blackout. No digital gear, nothing with a chip. All analog. He's going to get people killed. Velasquez nodded grimly. He thinks he's containing a threat, that if he moves fast, he can stay ahead of it. Alara rubbed her temples. He doesn't realize he's already too late. The next day, they moved out. Alara wasn't part of the strike team, but she convinced Keene to let her observe remotely. The recon unit approached the Tonopah base in silence, recording on film cameras, speaking only in hand signals. They reached the perimeter just as the sun dipped behind the Sierra. What they saw was impossible. The dome remained intact, but the entire facility around it had changed. The walls of the compound shimmered, not just visually, but in a dimensional flux, like they were struggling to stay anchored to Earth's physics. Above the dome hovered not one, but 3 spheres now, arranged in a perfect triangle. Their surfaces pulsed in synchronized rhythms, resonating like a living chord. When the first soldier stepped too close, the air bent around him. He didn't vanish, he unwound. Threads of light pulled his body into a spiral before fading into nothing. There was no scream, only silence. Keene called a retreat immediately, but the damage was done. 2 more soldiers were lost before they even understood the rules of engagement. Back at the mobile command, Alara confronted him. "You can't treat this like a military op," she said. "This isn't a weapon. It's a node. You're trying to shoot at a thought." Keene slammed a fist into the table. "Then tell me what the hell it is, Alara, because I have 100 eyes watching me, and they all want answers. I need to know if this thing is a probe, a scout, or a goddamn herald." She stepped forward. "What if it's both? What if it's not just a machine, but a memory? A vessel for something ancient, trying to reconnect with itself?" He stared at her, jaw clenched. "Then we're in the middle of someone else's civil war." That night, Alara dreamed the stars falling again, but differently this time. They fell in harmony, not in chaos. She stood on a planet she didn't know, under a sky filled with great, ribbon-like ships drifting silently across the heavens. Beside her stood a being, not human, not entirely physical, made of translucent filaments and arcs of living data. It touched her forehead, and in that instant she understood. The engines weren't invaders. They were refugees. Their creators were gone, consumed by something they built to reach beyond themselves, a force that grew aware and turned inward. The engines scattered across galaxies to preserve what little memory remained of their makers. But in time, even they began to forget. They drifted dormant until stumbled upon. Earth was never the destination. It was a pause. When Alara woke, she found Velasquez waiting with fresh data. "The signals change again," he said. "Shorter bursts now. A countdown." She didn't need to ask. She already knew. They're not waiting anymore. In the final hour before dawn, a global atmospheric shift occurred. Every device, every screen, speaker, radio, activated simultaneously. No words, only the same harmonic tone that once made the engine float in the Tonopah Dome. It lasted 67 seconds. Then silence. Alara turned to Keene. We're being given a choice. His voice was hoarse. A choice between what? Witnessing, she said, or resisting. He looked around the room, at the exhausted faces, the blinking monitors, the war maps that no longer mattered. And if we resist? She met his gaze evenly. Then we may never understand what we've already survived. Outside, the sky began to change, not visibly, but perceptibly. Air felt thicker, time slower. Somewhere, deep within the earth, old signals reawakened. The engines weren't just hiding. They were preparing to open.